Good morning. So great to be able to spend this weekend with you. This is my third occasion to be able here and to speak, and all three occasions have dealt with some aspect of marriage or family. I think that speaks well of the shepherds of this congregation to know how important and how serious this subject is amongst our brethren, and especially as our culture strays far and farther away from what God would have marriage and family to be. Those who are his children need to really redouble their efforts on focusing on being the kinds of marriages, the kinds of husbands and wives and parents and children that God would certainly have us to be. I want to take just a moment before we get into the lesson this morning that is called Covenant Marriage, or the covenant of marriage, to take a moment just to say how much I appreciate how we have been treated again, as we have in times past. We had a great opportunity to be hospitably treated on Friday night, and we got to enjoy dinner at the Bradford's house along with the Chandlers. I hadn't met the Chandlers before, and so that was certainly a good occasion for us to be able to meet them and to be able to enjoy an evening of conversation with them. Thankful that he's preaching here and that he loves this work and this congregation the way that he does. Certainly hope as a preacher that you'll understand how important it is to always get under your preachers, support them, do what you can in helping them in those efforts as well. Grateful for that. And then yesterday got to spend some great time with the Romines. We've known Brent and Becky for a while. As we mentioned, they've come to a couple of our retreats, and it was great. Although I will have to say I didn't even know he had spent time in Holland until he offered me some Gouda cheese yesterday. I didn't even know what that was. I'd had Gouda on many occasions, but he said they don't say Gouda in Holland, they say Gouda. And so we got a chance to talk a little bit about his life earlier when he was in Europe. I don't know how I had missed that before, but really good to spend some time with Brent and Becky as well. And then last night, got to spend time with the Crafts. I'm not sure if I had met them. We may have actually met, but I didn't really have that kind of recollection. But we know Scott and Monica. They have come to some of our marriage retreats and love them dearly. And so it was great to have that acquaintance. And then in addition to that, besides the great food we had, and then there were 4 young couples that we just could not get away from yesterday. No, they were there both occasions. And that was a special blessing, a very special blessing to us. To be able to spend some time with those young married couples that are in the early stages of focusing on their marriage. If I'm recalling correctly, there was nobody in that group of those 4 couples that had been married longer than 5 years. And so very early stages, but great to see young couples who are interested in growing their marriage and focusing on those things. And we talked about good books that can be read and good principles that can be applied. So certainly a great day for us yesterday, and we want to thank the congregation for that, and especially thank the shepherds for having us for this meeting. Very much appreciate the opportunity to be here with you and to study these things. I would ask you to continue, if you would, or to start if you've never done before, but pray for our work as well back in Bulverde. A congregation that is growing, and the Lord's providing us a lot of opportunities, and because of that we get a lot of opportunity to spend time and effort in marriages and working with marriages and trying to help couples grow in that relationship. So if you'd pray for us in that work, we would certainly appreciate that as well. We're going to start this morning with a lesson that we're calling Making a Covenant Marriage. This is the only lesson that is exactly the same as a lesson that I preached here before, which was in 2008. But if you're like me, first off, 2008 is a long way back to recall everything anyway. And so as Peter said, I put you in remembrance of these things. I think we need to do that sometimes. We need to be put in remembrance. But I picked this particular lesson for the Sunday morning, again, this particular series, because I think it may be the most important of the messages and the lessons that we've looked at, along with Friday night, which established a principle as to how we need to make God the focus of our marriage. I think we need to grasp ourselves and as a culture the concept of what it means to be in any kind of covenant relationship. And God describes marriage as a covenant relationship. And I think that's important. And if I can grasp the concept of that, because we live in a society where we know that divorce is rampant, the breakdown of marriage is rampant. There was a survey that was taken not too long back of young people between the ages of 18 and 24, and 44% that took that poll said marriage is irrelevant. They didn't just say it's not something I'm going to do. There's a large percentage of people that are taking the position that marriage just doesn't mean anything. You know, it's just a piece of paper was the way some of them described it. It doesn't change anything. And I would tell you, that's not God's idea of it at all. Covenants were serious in the Bible. So I want you to envision, many times they were referred to as blood covenants. And we're going to read one in just a moment with God and Abram, if you want to turn to Genesis chapter 15. Because God is going to make a covenant with Abram. And I'm just telling you, I don't know about you, but sometimes you read things in the Bible and you think, man, that's got to be pretty gruesome. I mean, just to see some of the things that are described. And in Genesis chapter 15, it's very much that way. He told Abram that he needed to do some things. And so he wanted him, in fact, to bring some animals before him. And in verse 7 it says, and he said to him, I'm the Lord who brought you out from the Ur of Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. But he said, O Lord God, how am I supposed to know that I shall possess it? He's saying, God, how do I know that I'm going to get the land that you promised me? And God said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to make a covenant with you about that. And so he says, bring me a heifer, 3 years old, a female goat, 3 years old, a ram, 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he brought him all these and cut them in half and laid each half over against the other. But he didn't cut the birds in half. I want you to just picture the scene first, because God's going to end up passing through that scene. But what he does, he says, I need you to bring me a cow. He brings him a cow and a goat and a ram. And he cuts them in half. That's literally from head to tail, He splits them in half, this length of, and he lays them like this. I understand that's gruesome to think about. But he takes a cow and he takes a goat and he takes a ram, cuts them in half and just lays them over the side. So I want you to get in your mind a picture of what that looked like. Get a visual with that. Because that's not a pleasant scene to look at. The ground is now covered with the blood of these animals. That's just natural, and that's why it was called a blood covenant. Because as somebody would make a covenant, if two people were making a covenant, what they would do is they would remove their sandals as they were going to make this covenant with each other. God's going to be the one passing through on this occasion, but two people who were making a covenant would pass through that with their shoes off, their sandals off. They would walk through, again, not a pleasant sight, walk through that pool of blood to get out on the other side. Because what they were saying was, as they looked at their feet, may I pay with my own blood if I do not keep the covenant that I make today. That was the nature of covenant. So I would ask you this. First off, I would tell you, anybody who's not married, this is not my suggestion for your marriage ceremony. Don't be cutting animals in half and thinking that that's going to make the difference. But the concept will. I would ask you this. If you did that, if you made a covenant, a blood covenant with somebody that said, this is so serious that I would pay with my own life if I'm going to break this covenant, if you were to do that and walk through that blood and come out on the other side, I would just ask you this. What's the chance you'd ever forget that occasion? I mean, we didn't do anything similar to that. But I can remember all kinds of things from my wedding ceremony. Can you remember things from your wedding ceremony? Because they were just emblazoned into your memory. I can remember my wife coming down the aisle. I can remember apparently it was a bad day for pollen because I was kind of weeping up front, and I'm sure it was an allergic reaction to something. I can remember her dad as he walked her down the aisle. I can remember her maid of honor's shoes that squeaked on every single step that she walked down that aisle. I mean, there are things that just get stuck in your memory, and you can see the pictures of that, and you can hear the sounds. I would tell you, if you had to walk through that pool of blood and come out on the other side, no question in my mind, you would remember that. And that's the key behind the concept of covenant. That God wants us to understand how much we need to remember the nature of this covenant. And that's important, because as we leave here this weekend, both you and me and Judy, as we have our relationship, a couple of things need to just be absolutely emblazoned in our brain, in our memory. Not just how I'm supposed to behave as a husband, that's important, and I need to continue to look at that, and I need to continue to grow. But I hope Ephesians 5, where Paul said, your marriage is a picture of Christ and the church, I hope that just gets lodged in. We can't get that out. That's how important that is. That marriage is important because it portrays the relationship of Jesus and his church. Not just what it does for us, the picture that it paints to the world. Get that stuck in our minds. But then secondly, the nature of the covenant. You realize we're in a society of half of marriages, give or take, are ending in divorce in our society, if that's an accurate figure. I would tell you, and brethren have for years wrestled with concepts regarding marriage and divorce and remarriage. And I understand that, and I'll be the first to tell you, I think God gives one and one exclusion only to severing a marriage, and that's the infidelity that Jesus talks about. But I would tell you, here's what concerns me. I think if we would spend more time with young people and with each other talking about the covenant nature and the seriousness of the commitment to begin with, we would have to spend less time on the back end of the equation. Does that make sense? In other words, if we could get people to understand what they were committing to, truly understand what they were committing to, we might have to spend a little less time trying to help the people that are doing all they can to get out of the commitment that they made. And I think God would have us to spend time on the front end. So all I want to do this morning is show you 4 similarities between a covenant and between being joined in holy matrimony or marriage between two people. As we think about that, I would tell you absolutely first, they are vows that are taken before God. I don't know that I've ever done a wedding ceremony that didn't start with a phrase that at least was similar to, we are gathered here in the presence of God. That's important. I want every couple that I am involved in their ceremony to understand this isn't only about you two. This is a promise I'm making here before God. How serious is that? We sang a song a few moments ago, He's in our midst. How serious should that make us about what we're doing here today? Or any Sunday that we're together like this? I mean, Jesus is here with us. How important is that? He sees what we're doing. He knows what's in our hearts. He knows what's in our minds. He knows what we're putting into our effort as well every time. How important is that? It's important. There was a wedding not too long back that was crashed. Actually, they crashed several. And only one person at the wedding really knew that they were coming at each of these weddings. It was Adam Levine and his band, Maroon 5, and they just went to some weddings. Now, I'm just telling you, as they went to the weddings of these young people were pretty excited. There wasn't anybody there saying, you know what, you weren't invited, you go home. They had set up and they played music at these weddings uninvited, except for knowing one person there that helped them get set up. Can you imagine if somebody like that, somebody of that notoriety, if you don't know who he is, you can always ask the Google. But if you think in terms of somebody of that magnitude coming to your wedding, do you think you'd share that with people? You're not going to believe who was at my wedding. Adam Levine, Maroon 5 was there. Pick any character, any performer, any historical figure, somebody that was famous in your mind, and they showed up at your wedding. Wouldn't you share that with people? When I think it was when FDR was president, if I'm recalling. Anyway, when it was either FDR or Eisenhower, I can't remember which one it was, but was president. He worshiped at a church there somewhere in Washington whenever he was in town. And that was known to other people. And I remember a guy writing about a guy who was it was a denominational group, but a guy who was the pastor, as he described himself there. Somebody called one time and said, is the president going to be there Sunday? We're going to be in town. Is the president going to be there and worship with you Sunday? We'd like to come. And they didn't ever know for sure when he was going to be there, but I liked the response of the guy there. He said, we don't know if the president will be here or not, but we're pretty sure God will be. I thought, wow, that makes a point, doesn't it? President doesn't mean much when you compare him to God. You know who was at your wedding? God was at your wedding. You think that doesn't matter? Look what he says in Deuteronomy chapter 23. Because he was watching. That makes a difference when God is watching. He sees. And so in Deuteronomy chapter 23, starting in verse 21, he talks about the concept of a vow. If you make a vow to the Lord your God, because that's who you're vowing to, you are promising in the presence of God to be joined to this person that you're being married to. If you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay fulfilling it. For the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. But if you refrain from vowing, you will not be guilty. You shall be careful to do what passed from your lips, for you have voluntarily vowed to the Lord your God what you have promised with your mouth. I love that because he's saying, unless you had a shotgun wedding where somebody was pointing that gun literally at you and making you say those things, short of that, God said, nobody made you say that. Because I don't know about you, I promised some pretty big things to my wife of that day and for the 45 years that have followed. Did you? Did you make some pretty significant promises? Some things that you said you were going to do regarding your faithfulness and regarding your love and all that goes with that? Man, I made some significant promises. He says, understand, you made those promises before God, and God, in fact, will hold you to it. He says you didn't have to do that. You could have said, I can't do this, I can't make this commitment, and God would have honored your choice to do that, and he wouldn't have held you to the commitment if you hadn't have made it. But he says, as soon as you voluntarily make the commitment, understand God thinks that is very important. Secondly, they are vows that are taken before witnesses. I didn't know this when I got married, didn't find this out till later. We had one of those books when you walk into the wedding or the reception, one or the other, but you had one of those books, where people, as they come in, they put their name in it, a registry book of some type. And I always just thought, you know what? Everybody was signing that, so I'd know who to send thank you cards to. Or really, as a normal husband, I know who to tell my wife to send thank you cards to. I thought it was just to have a record of that. But that isn't the way that process started. Because they signed that as they walked into the building where we were getting married. They walked up, signed the registry. Have you ever done that? When it started, you didn't do that. You signed that book when you walked out of the wedding. Because it wasn't a registry just to tell you who was there. It was a registry to tell you who had witnessed your ceremony. Who was there who could say, no, I heard you promise to do that, to hold you to it. Judy grew up in Temple Terrace. I didn't grow up, as I mentioned, even Friday night. I didn't grow up in a home of Christians at all. So there were a lot of these concepts that were new to me. I was committed and I made decisions that day, and I'm glad that I made the decisions and glad that I lived by the decisions, but I didn't understand all of those things. Because she grew up there, she grew up around a lot of preachers. Her dad worked at Florida College for a lot of time. And then Melvin Curry was one of my professors at Florida College, and that was the family she had grown up around and had known them for life. And I'd been a Christian just a short time, and at our reception, Melvin Curry, and I don't know if you know Brother Curry or not, he's not a man of great stature. Doesn't mean he's any less intimidating. He was a Golden Gloves boxer, which didn't make me feel any more secure around him. But he came up to my reception, and he tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned around and he said, "Did you hear what you said?" And I'm telling you, I was trembling because I was a new Christian. And honestly, my first thought process was, man, I wonder if I said something I shouldn't have said. I'm at my own reception. I'm trying to recall him. I thought, because I used to use language that a Christian shouldn't use, and I'm thinking, did I use foul language at my own wedding reception? I can't imagine that I did that. And I'm playing all this through my mind, and I thought, no, I didn't do that. Maybe I was gossiping. I said, "I'm sorry, Brother Curry, I don't understand." And he looked at me again. He says, "Did you hear what you said?" So I'm thinking, was I gossiping? Was I talking about somebody when I shouldn't be gossiping? I really didn't understand. And then he said, "When you were up front and the preacher was asking you those questions and you were responding, did you hear what you said? Because I did, and I will hold you to it." I'm telling you, that was 45 years ago, almost 46. And I can still get a little scared turning around thinking, is Brother Curry behind me? Tapping me on the shoulder again. I mean, I can picture that entire scene. But I am so appreciative that I had not only him, but others in my life who said, we were there, we heard what you said, and he said, and I will hold you to it. I appreciate that. That's what witnesses are for. There was a time in Russia where the best man had to pay a fine if the marriage didn't at least last a certain amount of time. That might make you rethink that role, wouldn't it? Hey, will you be my best man? I don't know. Tell me how serious you are about this. Because I'm not paying a fine because you decide to quit. Other people witness. Jesus talks about how important that is in Matthew chapter 18. That's not about marriage at all. But he's saying, you know what? He said, when there's just two people talking, there's an issue between two people, sometimes you can't solve that. And so what does he say to do? He says to take back some witnesses, because witnesses serve the purpose of verifying the truth of the matter. And so no matter how badly I might want to say, I never promised to do that. There are way too many people that were sitting there that day who can say, oh, yes, you did. Oh, yes, you did. Covenants were before witnesses. Other people saw the agreement that you were making. That was the nature of a covenant. Thirdly, covenants just show the seriousness of a commitment. The whole idea, it had to be something major. If I was going to sell you a cloak, we didn't make a blood covenant with each other. That was just too easy of a thing. I'd give you the cloak, you'd give me the money, and we're done with that transaction. But treaties between nations and things that were associated with marriages, and especially marriages that were intended to bring together a child from one nation and a child of the other nation to help provide the relationship between the nations, things that were critically important, large purchases of land and areas and such, were oftentimes done with covenant agreements, because it just shows how serious it is. And you go back to Ruth and you understand the concept of seriousness. Because as God passed through those cut animals with Abram, there's things that are interesting that happen. Abram's name was changed, as in a wedding ceremony when my wife's name became Broyles that day, where it was Evans before. She took on my name. Abraham got a new name from God because of the covenant God was making with him. There was an exchange on God's part. God said, I'm giving you this land as a part of this covenant. As we had an exchange of rings that was a verification of a covenant made. And so every time I look at a wedding ring, I understand that is not just a piece of jewelry. That is a symbol of an agreement that I made. That's what it's intended to point out to me every single time I see it, every time she sees hers. It's a serious decision. And that's why you have Ruth saying things like, I'm going. Remember, they tried to send her back. Naomi says, go back to your own people. You're not even Jewish. Just stay here with your people. And she said, what? I'll not do that. I'm going where you are going. That's how serious this is. Your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. Those are incredibly serious commitments. And a covenant shows the seriousness of the marriage relationship. We make a covenant. And so God in Malachi faults the Israelites because they had dealt treacherously, he said, with the covenant wife of their youth. How important is it to understand, I have made that agreement? And so you think about that. I mean, we took vows. Yours may have been similar. Most of them used to sound pretty similar to saying, you promised to take this person for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, sickness and in health. Always like the one guy whose response, he said, yes, no, yes. It's not 6 different questions. It's how serious are you about this? So when everything's not going perfectly, which it won't, there will be, as we mentioned, conflict. There will be tough times. There will be things that assault your marriage when children come in. I mean, I don't mean bad things. They just change things that are going on in the relationship. You may end up dealing with aging and sick parents. You may deal with sickness or issues in your own spouse, your children. All kinds of things happen in marriage that make it an incredible challenge sometimes. What we're doing is saying, this is so serious that it doesn't matter what's going on inside of it. I am committed to staying absolutely true to it. Why? Because I've made a covenant. It's different than other things. I cannot blame her if things aren't going the way that they should be, because I'm supposed to be who I'm supposed to be, and that's who I can deal with, and the same on her part. It's my responsibility to love her. I hope that she responds in kind. It's her choice as to how she wants to do that, but God tells me, you have made a covenant, because covenants are promises. You've made a covenant to be who you're supposed to be, and it really doesn't matter whether she fulfills her part or not. That doesn't change whether I am supposed to be true to my promise. When I counsel with young couples before they get married, I send them home with Ephesians 5. One of the exercises I say, when you come back, bring all the if-then clauses out of Ephesians 5. You remember those in school? When you have to do those if-then, if this, then this, and you have these conclusions. Bring me back all the if-then clauses. They come back the next week. Typically, most of them are saying, I'm confused. I must not have understood, because I can't find any if-then clauses in Ephesians 5. I said, oh, you understood. That's the whole point. There are none. God never said, Mark, here's what I need you to do if Judy does this. He said, Mark, here's what I need you to do because you are a husband, you are a Christian, and you are making a commitment today to do that, period. My responsibility is not based on hers. Hers is not based on mine. And God needs us to understand the seriousness of making that kind of commitment. And then finally, neither marriage nor covenants are built with escape mechanisms. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying God didn't provide a reason. He did, singular, a reason for infidelity. But I do get asked things like, so Mark, when do you recommend a couple gets divorced? That's an easy one for me to answer. Never, ever will I recommend that, ever. Reconciliation is always a better thing. I understand it may not happen, but don't ask me to recommend that you don't reconcile. That's not going to happen from my end. But I understand some marriages do sever, but that's not because God intended us to have that loophole. We sometimes treat marriage like it's a contract. There's a huge difference between contracts and covenants. Why does a contract even exist? You ever think about that? There are people here that still, some of the older people who will talk about, I remember when all you had to do was shake hands with somebody. You just make an agreement and you shake hands. Try that with the bank. Hey, I'd like to buy this new car. If you wouldn't mind giving the dealer that $25,000 or $50,000, let's shake hands on it. I'm telling you, I'll pay you back. I'm not thinking your bank's going to be real happy about that way of doing it, are they? They're going to make you sign a contract. Why? Because contracts are based on mistrust. The whole concept of a contract is based on mistrust. Covenants are based on trust. I'm going to promise to do something. period. Not because you are telling me I have to do it, because it is who I am and I'm making the commitment, a promise. And so the bank says, I need to have a legal way to make you pay or I can take the car back. You need to have a legal way that says, I have paid, the car is now mine, you cannot take it back. It's based on mistrust. We don't think the other person, or we want to make sure we have paperwork that indicates the other person is going to do what they say. Covenants are not. Jesus said, what God has joined, let no man separate. Are you going to have conflict? Absolutely. But I'll tell you, you better figure out how to resolve conflict, as we talked about. Because I've made some incredible promises, and God didn't give me an escape mechanism where I can find a crackerjack lawyer who says, hey, I found a loophole. You know what, if we just go down here and see this little phrase down here, I think that's going to allow us to get out of this agreement. That isn't the way we approach marriage or covenants. We need to understand, if you are married, if you're yet to be married, that you're going to make a covenant agreement with somebody. And so what if Abram hadn't done what he was supposed to do? Abram did not participate in the covenant other than bringing the animals in Genesis chapter 15. Abram didn't until Genesis chapter 17 become circumcised as his sign of his promise to the covenant. God said, I will give you this land, I will make you this nation, I will bless these people, period. And God was going to live up to the promise that he made because he is God and it's because of promise that he made. We need to make sure we understand marriage as being the same way. So my marriage isn't about me being happy, though I am. I am highly blessed by God in my marriage relationship, but it's not about me being happy, about me being content, about me being pleased or satisfied. My marriage first is about I'm either going to be a promise keeper or a promise breaker, because I have made an agreement. If you're married, you've made an agreement. You remember when you bought a house? If you bought one? You remember there's one piece of paper, I mean there's a lot of pieces of paper. You remember the first time you bought a house? I thought, are you kidding me? We're buying a house and I've got to sign, it seemed like 100 documents to buy a house. But you remember there was one in there to a Christian that really is more important than all the rest. I mean the deed and the mortgage, all that stuff is important. But you also signed one that was called a promissory note, period. It's just a promissory note. It just says, I promise to pay and to abide by the things that all the rest of these pay. For a Christian, that's all it should take, really, isn't it? I promise. I promise. Then I get to choose whether I'm going to be a promise keeper or I'm going to be a promise breaker and a liar. I'm convinced that marriage is intended to mirror that relationship of being committed to God. And so my commitment to my wife is the same kind of serious as my commitment to my God. So as we leave here this weekend, we want better marriages. We want to grow in the relationships, but I think all of that starts with understanding what's the purpose of marriage, to please God and to glorify Him. And what's the commitment of marriage? It is a covenant promise I have made in the presence of God and in others, and I need to take that very seriously and understand it is intended to be a lifetime commitment. If you're not a Christian, I would tell you that's really the same commitment God looks for as far as coming to Him. Are we going to commit to Him and say, I'm going to live with this, I'm going to stay with this, I want to give my life to God, and I want to make that agreement to God? That's the nature of confessing my Lord and Savior as my Lord. You remember Jesus saying, why would you call me Lord? You don't do what I ask you to do. What I'm doing is saying, He's my Lord, I'm going to live how He wants me to live. I understand I've got to walk away from my past life. That's the nature of repentance, giving my life to Him, living for God rather than living for myself and my way. And I walk down into the waters of baptism and He says, here's the greatness of that. You can be raised absolutely brand new person to live a life for God. If that's what you want to do today, we hope that you do that. We'd love to help you do that. If you understand that, if you've already examined that. If not, don't stop looking at it. It's too important a decision not to continue to evaluate. For those of us that are Christians, May we help our spouses understand how much we appreciate what God has done for us in giving them to us, and how committed we are to keep the covenant that we had made with them and with our God. If we can help you respond, let us know while we stand, while we sing.